Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is May 6th, 2026, Wednesday. Just launching Yu-Gi-Oh! As I'm talking here. And yeah, you can see on the SteamDB chart, it has an alert box that says it's 10 a.m. That's part of the coding that I'm working on. Yeah, I did some more coding, trying to move my macros over. The alert box is interesting and it highlights a real issue in general with the HTML standard and how JavaScript and all that works, in that you cannot stylize the alert box anyways. And in the case of Firefox, at least, there's a checkbox that says you can steal focus as it is. It allows the notifications like this to bring that tab into the foreground instead of being in the background. Also, if alert boxes trigger a bunch, it will pop up a notification warning to see if you want the constant alerts, and that is one of the few times alerts are used in their real form, is when somebody is trying to hijack or harass you on a web page and with ads or pop-ups or just annoyances, making it impossible for you to do what you really want to do on that page. But for the most part, pop-up blockers take alerts as a pop-up and will consider blocking them in many cases. But yeah, the fact that there is no way to apply custom style sheets or custom HTML to an alert has made them completely useless in almost all scenarios, because every single web designer will just make their own pop-ups through dynamic HTML5 type displays that are actually part of the page, where the alert itself is more part of the operating system. Yeah. Different prompts probably should be standard. And when you look at like how Android does it, the fact that if there is an input box that only accepts numbers, it gives you a number pad instead of a keyboard, is nice, certainly. And that there are password autofilling functions built into Android, even if that is just connecting to Google Passwords and Chrome, or some other password manager that you might have installed. It's nice there. If you pick a color, for some reasons, very rarely do you use the color picker. It looks different on Android, but I think the color picker also on like Windows and desktop operating systems also still have to pop up a color picker option. It'd be crazy if you had to type in a color in hex code or in some other code or just by name. So yeah, we're scrolling down the SteamDB chart here, seeing what people have been playing. This chart doesn't change that much. Relevant information a little bit, but not by much. In the old days, I was scraping this chart and trying to put it into a longer running chart to give more information, but I think after about a year of doing that, I really realized it was useless information, and inherently I might be even starting to warm to the idea that this chart is not that useful information either, because the actual games that we're talking about right now are not Counter-Strike 2 or PUBG. I haven't heard anyone speak of PUBG in years. We're talking about Resident Evil Requiem. We're talking about Slay the Spire 2. We're talking about Pragmata. Yeah. And a lot of these top games, which probably some of the multiplayer ones are just full of bots anyways, have nothing new to say about them at all. They have not put out press releases. People may be playing them, but it is more of a marker of where the entirety of the gaming community gets split up, and where we lose gamers, for lack of a better term, to time sucks like Team Fortress 2, where people become esports players and just play that one game, or they become soloists, I guess might be a good phrase to call them, where they just play that one game. And even new games like Heroes of Might and Magic Golden Era is going to be a really long game, so if people stick with that and play that, that's going to be their only one game they play for years upon years, potentially. That's always been kind of the case with fighting games too. So yeah, there are, for lack of a better term, entire genres that I dismiss, just as they are the soloist type of games where people who are still playing The Sims are only playing The Sims. Yeah. And so this isn't a chart of gamers at so much playing a bunch of games and then their top 2 or 3 getting put on the top 100. It's a chart more of, there is a hardcore community that only plays Binding of Isaac, and there's a hardcore community that only plays Palworld, and those communities are probably not overlapping at all, maybe a couple people. But I don't have a solution either. Like, I really don't have a suggestion there. If the 24-hour peak concurrent charts are the past, then and here we have the same pop-up because it's the same website, so that does tell you that I ran this macro before 10 a.m. I ran my old macro before 10 a.m. The most wishlisted upcoming Steam games is, I guess, the future. But the future is hazy to say the least, in that there are games that don't have an announced release date like Fable, and there are games with big controversies around them like Subnautica 2, and there are games that may just not come out at all. Like, I've never even heard of Light No Fire, I don't think. And then there's the Steam Machine, which hopefully that comes out. The Steam controllers are sold out, so yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if stock was fairly small. I would like to know if they were willing to say the number of units that were sold, because I do have a speculation that this first wave of Steam controllers that was sold may have been the exact number of controllers that were going to be bundled with the Steam machines, and the Steam machines got delayed. So it would have told us how many they expected to sell, both of the controllers and possibly the Steam machine, which Valve has already said, yeah, the demand was higher than they expected. But yeah, I think Valve is in a pretty good space to just sell out on Steam controllers, and now they can just say they're out of stock while still saying that the controller actually did come out. The YouTube content creators that will talk about the controllers are likely a big percentage of people who ordered the controllers, so they'll make videos on them and talk about them. They already have, and that'll just build up hype for a very soft launch due to the economic situations. Meanwhile, real gamers who want a Steam controller will probably be lucky if they get any available for purchase to them in before Christmas. Yep. This also gives Valve probably more time to try and improve the Steam controller firmware if there's any real issues there, which, yeah, I think there's issues there, certainly. Windows in particular has a Windows Hello program, and it is for fingerprint scanners and security keys to automatically log you into Windows. If they could get Steam controllers to work that way, that might be very helpful for Windows. But I'm not sure when Microsoft would really certify anything there, and there's a special encryption key process there, I believe. And it's not even really implemented and used very often. And fingerprint scanners to log into a computer are actually bad in the United States because you're only protected from incriminating yourself via speech and thought that you keep in your own head. You're not protected from incriminating yourself via fingerprints. So they totally can arrest somebody, fingerprint them, and then use their fingerprints to log into a computer, or their face, or their eyes, any kind of biometrics. I guess they may have not ever had like a voice thing. And let's face it, in the United States there have been several stories where judges have straight up kept people in jail for refusing to hand over a password, even though that would almost certainly not be constitutional. Yeah. Do I have anything else to talk about? Yeah, I was working on code, and then after spending maybe 20 minutes on it, I realized I had already written the code and done it better before. Certainly this is a problem that constantly haunts me. And yeah, there's a part of a problem in that I'm just not constantly working on the code, so it's not fresh in my mind. I'm jumping around and doing many other things. But yeah, I am running into a issue where on Gaming on Linux in particular, there are links that have anchor points. So they have the number sign and then they have a word, and the number sign and the word is an anchor point which will have the page scroll down to any anchored word like that on the page. Sometimes it automatically, sometimes you have to actually anchor the word yourself. I think it kind of works both ways depending on the HTML page. Well, this is creating a problem as it tries to open the Gaming on Linux articles, in that it's opening two copies of the same page, one with the anchor word and one without. And I'm having a real hard time eliminating the ones with anchor words, because it seems like JavaScript does not differentiate the two URLs, because the anchor, I guess, technically isn't part of the URL, even though it's part of the href. So yeah, I've run into a unique problem there that I'm struggling with, and there's still really just step one of the code. One thing about this code is that it will be a lot of copying and pasting the code. I won't be able to make one script that works for everything, which is probably the better way to do it anyways, is to have more custom things so I can adjust and tweak things. There is also a possibility that the code I'm doing right now is not as great as how UI Vision does it, because in the case of UI Vision, there's easier ways to limit the number of links you're matching to and looking at, whereas the way I have it set up right now, it's really only grabbing all the links in the document, in the HTML document, at once and going through them all, which is probably not faster. What else have I been doing over the past couple days? Well, video game wise, I've been playing Blueprints, and I am increasingly getting close to the end of Blueprints, I think. I made it to a final exam at the end of Classrooms, and it asked me to really fill out a final exam, multiple choice, but really hard stuff that you really are unlikely to know and be able to ace, which the achievement is acing the final exam. The only way I could see possibly doing that, if I'm going to go after that achievement, is to look up all the answers. A lot of what the Classrooms before then are teaching is exactly what's on the final exam, and some of what is in the Classrooms are teaching helps you with some of the other puzzles, but it really is getting insane when you get to the final exam, because they're asking you to have a clear understanding of the history and the geography of the world, when they have not put anywhere near enough other sources of information that you would know that throughout the game. And I'll fully admit, maybe I wasn't paying that much attention to little bits of story, but it's not like the world of Blueprints is just overflowing with books to read. All the books are in the library, and most of the books that are important have to be purchased from the bookstore. Very late game. Yeah, there is definitely a feeling that Blueprints is really just stretching for time on some of its late puzzles, and only creators of the game would really have not struggled with it. But yeah, I'm really struggling with a lot of the puzzles, just because there are not really enough hints or any hints at all, and there are very few of the puzzles left, and a lot of it also is behind randomness. There is the random aspect of Blueprints that I think probably needed to go away once you got to room 46 the first time. I don't know how that would really play out, but at some point it does just feel like you should be able to select any room whatsoever you want, instead of being given a draft of 3 rooms. And you should be able to place every room without needing to spend coins, well, keys or gems.
3 normal home cooks have each been given an ingredient that in the past they have called boring. Because today we want them to create a dish where every element uses that boring ingredient. And the beauty is...
I have no idea why YouTube just decided to play. I'm gonna force close that even. Sorry for that. Like, just autoplay after minutes upon minutes, 20 minutes of silence. Yeah, that was sorted a British group of cooks. They're run by a production company, and they pretend like they're just a small-time content creator, but they really aren't, and they definitely are ambitious and successful for having that extra support and it being ambitious. They're alright. But yeah, increasingly, I don't know how much more of blueprints I can even see due to the random aspect, and I don't know how much more blueprints I'm going to actually try to engage with and solve myself versus just looking up the answers. Like the sigils, I've kind of figured out how to do the sigils, and I don't want to really spoil the realm sigils, but even though I've kind of figured it out, I'm still not really able to find 2 or 3 of them, and that's a real problem because that is a major part. And then there's another thing that I won't even mention, that I cannot find any elements to that at all to make any progress. And theoretically, I've just seen everything there is to see as far as what's in the actual estate. So increasingly it's starting to feel like I'm going to do runs where I am just doing the runs for out of habit, really, for not really good reasons. And yeah, I'm increasingly getting irritated in that there's one thing I want to do, and it requires crafting a certain item and finding a certain room, and I have done both of those things multiple times, but I've never been able to do both of those things at the same time. And so I have attempted it 4, 5, 6 times out of frustration, spending almost all my focus on that, and I still failed. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. There is a issue there, certainly, in the solo event that's going on, in that I'm just not winning, and the solo event has this rechargeable energy, so as my rechargeable energy is completely full, there's a loss of potential refilling of the chargeable energy. So in total I'm getting less energy. Regardless, I'm not winning, so that is a real problem. These Pokemon cards, the Mega Shinies, Mega Alluring is, I think, the newest expansion, are so overpowered that even previous expansions before them really struggle to win. I'm playing Memento Mori. I've gotten the most recent Gacha Girl, Anime Girl available on one account. I'm trying to get it on the other. Otherwise, I'm very much standard amounts of progress. Memento Mori, very consistent in the amount of progress it seems to be able to get over the course of a week, and dailies are really the only thing you can do in Memento Mori if you're free to play, and even if you were paying, you'd have to really pay through the nose to get your characters any stronger so that they could get further along in a few places. Which, at a certain level, I guess consistent gacha games are what I am looking for. Something I can do every day. Good news about playing Blueprints is I haven't been doing any cracking the cryptic things. And see, it says I've been playing for 173 hours. I think 73 hours probably is wrong there, but 100 hours seems reasonable. More likely it is 70 or 80 hours, and 100 hours is wrong, though. And yeah, I would say I don't see how I could go too much further along and just try and get all of the achievements. Yeah. And then I definitely am going to be in a weird position when I am done, in that I don't know if I'm going back to to Resident Evil 2 remake, and whether I'm starting a new play on that or trying to continue to play the second game through on it. Yeah. Or if I want to just go somewhere else. I don't think I would want to do another puzzle game. I think that would be a mistake. It's interesting how there's an advertisement here for the Steam Deck, despite the fact that the Steam Deck is not in stock, but there isn't an advertisement for the Steam controller on the front page. Yeah. So it does feel like maybe they even knew that there might be less in stock or less focus on the Steam controller. It will be a little overwhelming if we have a Steam Deck ad and then we also have a permanent Steam controller ad. I wouldn't be surprised if what they'll do is, like right about here, they will add a Steam machine / Steam controller ad. Then it will be a banner ad for both of them. And maybe even all three with the VR headset. Yeah. The new and trending games here are probably the more relevant conversations to have of the day, but I don't know if they last much longer than any individual day. Yeah. Certainly would be a shorter experience in the warm-up section if I did just look at the new and trending 7 or 8 games and the popular upcoming games on Steam. But yeah, that would be less information too. Yeah, I'm still in a very weird position as far as Blueprints is just 100% spoilers, so there's not a good way to talk about it except for in the abstract. Yeah. I also kind of wonder if Blueprints isn't at some point going to get an update that makes it easier, because there are definitely elements that feel like they aren't finished. The fact that there are like a lack of notes and hints, and that there is no hint system in the game, which I think would be very helpful. If I'm working on a realm sigil, for instance, for 20 minutes, I think it's very fair for video games to straight up just add a pop-up that says, do you want a hint or do you want to automatically solve it? Maybe that's something you don't add until 1 year into a game, after most of the hype is over. Here we can see a problem is that this fest almost certainly was centered and thought up because of Slay of the Spire 2 in its early access beta phase, and that is mixed. Magic the Gathering Arena has a lot of reasons why people hate Magic the Gathering in general and the digital arena game, so that's mixed. Vampire Crawlers, technically card based, but not really what you're thinking about when you're thinking like deck builders or collectible card games. I guess maybe it's a deck builder with roguelite elements. This is a chess game. This is a card game technically, but it's poker. That is the other problem certainly with card game sales, is that there's many different types of card games, and most of them, when they are different types, are completely different from each other. Yeah. Steam Deck card games, I guess, make a lot of sense. Is Peglin a card game, really? I wouldn't really say it is. I think they're stretching the definition to anything that has card game as a tag, which is probably an overused thing. Oh yeah, I keep thinking, and I keep not getting around to saying it. One of the things I liked about The Witness, well, there's two things that The Witness does very contrasting to Blueprints. First of all, The Witness, at nearly the last second, eliminated almost all of its storyline, with the exception, well, all of its storyline with the exception of an ending cinematic, basically, and a bunch of audio cassettes that don't really mean anything and are just basically monologues and speeches. But there was going to be story in The Witness, and they took it out so people could better just focus on the puzzles. But also, they made an island where you could go from one area to another area if you got bored or frustrated with one type of puzzle or one variation of puzzle. In Blueprints, there's a lot less capability to do that because you are limited by your number of steps each day. Every time you go from one room to another, you lose a step. So the idea of getting frustrated or bored with a puzzle that might be in one room and going to another room is going to penalize you heavily. But generally speaking, particularly once you've figured out most things, there isn't going to be anything else to do. And if there is some other place to go and do something, it is going to be the same place to go and do something. Which, yeah, the fun is perhaps getting boiled out of Blueprints as you get closer and closer to the end, because your focus is going to be so exclusively on solving that one puzzle that you haven't yet solved. And yeah, I don't think the game is going to open up and do anything different at this point either. I don't even really believe it's going to give me a good wrap up on the narrative and story. Which, yeah. The main thing that Blueprints has for it is that I had a lot of nostalgia for the Maze book, and the guy who worked on the Maze book did some, I think, small amount of art in the gallery for Blueprints. But I think the Maze book had more of a gimmick and more of an interesting application of that gimmick than even Blueprints does. If you have no knowledge or nostalgia for the Maze book, Blueprints is probably a game that, if you even make it to the cutscene in the first credits of making it to room 46, that is probably the only amount you're willing to play. Steam Decks, both in refurbed and new, are out of stock. You can click on the Steam controller from there, I guess. Steam controller is out of stock too. Yeah. In fairness, Isles of Insight, I believe, was the last big open world puzzle game I played, and I had some real problems with that game too, in that it was basically giving you thousands upon thousands of way too similar puzzles to solve, and felt like it was just procedurally generating puzzles that would never end. Yeah. The suggestion, I guess, and here I want to ask, does Mac OS support Windows Hello devices? The answer is almost certainly no. Does Mac OS support logging in with a pen? Let's check this Reddit article and search that. Windows Hello devices list. Most of them are laptop things. So yeah. Windows Hello ESS. I assume that is enhanced security something. Fingerprints incompatible. Enhanced sign-in security. Compatible cameras. Yeah. So yeah, most people probably won't know what Windows Hello is, as in a way of signing it in with enhanced security or biometrics. So this would probably be a hack more than something that Steam would do themselves. But there, I probably should see if I could throw it on the forum on Steam. Not that anybody at Valve actually looks at those forums, but yeah, there is a possibility there that that would be a cool hack, to have it where you type in a pin via buttons on a Steam controller, and that would unlock an encryption key that would work with Windows Hello. You could set your password to just yeah, it seems like 2 years ago though. You can use authenticators. Apparently with Mac OS. So then I guess the other question is, does KDE support authenticators? Because that would be the one Linux desktop I would care about. Let's see. Step by step for enabling fingerprint. Let's see what this article is. Sorry, I'm wasting my time just here. Yeah. Yep, it seems like there's something like that already built in. But I know Windows Hello is particularly secure, or it pretends to at least be particularly secure. It may very well, being proprietary closed source software, not secure at all. But yeah, they push it as secure with the device unlocking an encryption key and handing the encryption key over, whereas a fingerprint reader might very well just be sending a raw image over to the software, and then the software may just be comparing the raw image of a fingerprint to known good fingerprints, which would be easier to potentially... No, honestly, I think if you found a way to hack either one, you'd be able to hack them both. Yeah. Depends on how the encryption key works, really, because the encryption key would have to have some kind of key sent from the computer first as a challenge or assault of the code. That way you couldn't just copy the contents of the memory. I don't think any of it's really anywhere as secure as they pretend it to be, though. Like locks on front doors of houses, for the most part they are there just to keep honest people out. They're not going to stop people with battering rams or chainsaws or axes and dishonest people who would just lockpick a lock. But yeah, that is an interesting thing that I'll think about if I want to post a suggestion on the Steam discussion forum somewhere. There may very well not be enough memory inside of the controller, the Steam controller, to have an encryption key, though. Even though an encryption key might only be like 10 kilobytes to a megabyte, one extra megabyte of space may very well not exist. Looks like we didn't have any of the Video Games Chronicle articles open up today again. My workaround doesn't seem like it's really working around these sponsored content articles. Yeah, I think, increasingly getting faster at doing the warm-up section, because I am not having anything to say. Just gonna open all of those articles. That should be good enough. So, Video Games Chronicle says Bond has a special place on Nintendo. IO CEO says he'll do everything to make 007 First Light run well on the Switch 2. I think that is probably the required standard response when dealing with Nintendo, is to pretend like the Switch 2 is, or whatever Nintendo hardware, is capable of playing much more demanding games designed for PlayStation and Xbox in this generation. They pretty much have been saying the same thing for games that were coming out on like the Nintendo 64 or even the Super NES, when the competition then was more powerful. This guy, to me, just does not strike me as James Bond at all. I think a big part of it is the hair. It's just a little too wild and crazy for who I'd expect James Bond to be. He also has like a fairly high receding hairline for a younger person. Bring that down by an inch. Jawline is, I think, probably also a little too square for James Bond. Yeah. Kind of feels like they're trying to make somebody who maybe is even a little bit Tom Cruise-ish. In the James Bond. Yeah. There's, of the many actors who played James Bond, there's one in particular who I think really is the James Bond I think of physically. And it is one of the earlier James Bond actors. I think maybe the second one. Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna look this up. I'm not perhaps awake enough and or just really distracted today. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I'll say, to begin with, this guy absolutely does not look like James Bond to me at all. This is the James Bond I think I'm thinking of. Although there's not like a huge problem with the other James Bonds. I'm not sure I really recognize these guys at all. But yeah. You can see his hairstyle is come down a little bit more, and it's not up and wild like that, and it's certainly not bleach blonde. And I guess he does kind of have a square jaw a lot of times. Let's see, I feel like I need to find an article though, just to get all 8 of them. So there was a James Bond in 1954 in a TV adaptation. I don't think people really would remember Barley Nelson. Sean Connery. Yeah, I was thinking that as it. He is the James Bond I'm thinking of from 7 films. David Niven was in a Casino Royale, one of the failed Casino Royale movies in '67. George Lazenby. It was only in 1. Roger Moore might be a second option, but honestly probably be 3rd or 4th option. Timothy Dalton was only in 2, but I do recognize him, so I think his timing was a little bit better. And yeah, I could even see younger people saying Pierce Brosnan. And maybe they are trying to go a little bit with Pierce Brosnan's face in the game, but younger. Maybe they're even, but yeah, Daniel Craig has been in a massive 5 movies, and I don't think I've watched any of them. Yeah, I could see that they were trying to do Pierce Brosnan, but to me, I think it will always be that Sean Connery is the James Bond actor, which is funny because Sean Connery, if you look at pictures of him, kind of drastically changed as he aged. Like, just looks completely different in his old age, and it's hard to imagine that. And yeah, Sean Connery very possibly was in his like 30s when he looked like he was in the 50s back in the day, when they weren't just doing a whole bunch of digital de-aging and Botox and stuff like that. And so when I hear the name Sean Connery, I really don't think of James Bond. I think more of, well, actually I think of Highlander 2 first and foremost, in the way he looked in that. But yeah, Hunt for Red October too. Or if I really go back, Zardoz is a different Sean Connery movie. I think he did that before the James Bond movies and before he became popular. Yeah. But yeah, that is probably just me being an old fuddy-duddy saying not my James Bond, but yeah, this new 007 First Light game doesn't look like James Bond, and I haven't seen a lot of gameplay around it, but I would be surprised if it actually played like any kind of James Bond movie would play out, or book would play out. James Bond, like miniseries, probably should just be in public domain, in my opinion, and it is questionable as far as what the future of James Bond movies being made up from nothing are going to be like. Also now, I think the James Bond movies are in the hands of Amazon, which we'll see what happens there. Moving on, Xbox has scrapped its Copilot AI companion on consoles. Asha Sharma has said the feature doesn't align with where we're headed. Okay. That is perhaps some easy sacrifice to make, really, because there has been this real fear that Asha was previously in charge of an AI division of Microsoft, and that she was going to push for more AI and push for it to be integrated in Xbox, and now she is eliminating something AI, which will be seen as a win for the good guys, for the anti-AI team. It almost certainly wasn't going to ever work particularly well. The idea that you could, I assume, voice chat and get answers to how to beat parts of the game, but I bet it was never going to actually accurately give you information or work at all, like most AI answers, or at least half of them seem to be made up and wrong. Of course, there is a possibility that it is just good branding here, and some other AI feature will be added later. It might also indicate that Asha Sharma wanted to get out of the AI division she was in. She saw it perhaps not as a way of the future, and by taking leadership in Xbox, she maybe made a parallel move more than even a promotion, just to get away from a division that's going to potentially get shut down. Yeah. It certainly would hurt content creators. It's also worth pointing out there's a bit of a bias here. If there was AI solutions to looking up the game, how to beat parts of the game, but at a certain level, if somebody needs help, it needs to be hard-coded and programmed into the game. It rather sucks in Blueprints, to go back to that there isn't a hint that you can bring up and get hints in game. So I am just having to Google answers, and it really sucks that there isn't a notebook in the game. It would make a lot of sense for you to be able to, at any point, press a button and take a screenshot of the game and have a notebook you're carrying in the game to check, instead of what I'm doing, which is pulling out my cell phone every time and often having to unlock it, taking a picture of the screen, and then having just a whole bunch of photos. I have probably 100 photos of screenshots, effectively, of blueprints that I have to go back and reference in particular books. So I'm just looking at screenshots of book pages, which when I take the pictures, they go in kind of an opposite order than you'd think. So the last page will be the most recent page, and you have to read right from left, effectively swiping through different pictures. Ubisoft's 2010 strategy game Ruse has returned from the dead. Eugene System has re-released the game with all DLC included. I remember RUSE just because of the initialism RUSE. I don't know what that stood for though, but I remember seeing the name. But then I think I pretty much just dismissed it after that point because there was no there was no interest in my mind to play a military game, particularly in 2010. Next we have "Nice try" as a quote. Ubisoft responds to leaked Assassin's Creed multiplayer game screenshot. Assassin's Creed Invictus is currently in development at Ubisoft Montreal. They're claiming that the game has been heavily altered. I would fully agree with that, because it would be pretty crazy for Ubisoft to not now there is an interesting point here as we look at the tweet, in that they're saying it's been heavily altered, most probably with AI. Not great to spread misinformation down, but this is probably the response, even if the rumor is true, that every company should just say out loud. And but then I guess if you deny something and then you come back and say, actually, that denial was a lie, you look like a liar, and you don't want to look like a liar as a publisher or advertiser. So yeah, but you probably should get these kinds of responses more than "we do not comment on rumors and speculation" as the standard response, or just "no comment" in general as a standard response. But yeah, Ubisoft has wanted Assassin's Creed to have multiplayer elements that were successful for decades now. And while some of those multiplayer modes were nice little hide and seek type experiences, they were inherently feeling like they were taking away development time and development resources from the main single player game, which obviously was going to be the default focus. Assassin's Creed is, like every other game, a game that succeeds in its single player aspects, and then companies get greedy and want live service experiences. So if there was a multiplayer Assassin's Creed game for Ubisoft to announce, they would announce it gleefully. So yeah, I seriously doubt such a thing will exist. Logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense anyways to have a Assassin's Creed multiplayer game, while the hide and seek game mechanic worked alright it didn't really synergize with the idea of you are an assassin and there's very few assassins, and usually there's only one of import in the game, and you're single-handedly changing all of history, or the direction of history. Yeah. In the new RPG game mechanic, I would also say, of Assassin's Creed compared to the old way Assassin's Creed played, might also make multiplayer even more difficult to feel like an Assassin's Creed game as what they are now. Let's see. Moving on, the Mind's Eye studio has reportedly laid off 170 employees following update parroting alleged attacks. Bill the Rocket Boy lays off more staff following Mind's Eye game update and employee legal action. So yeah, it seems like the people in charge, I think it's the CEO, is straight up crazy and having a mental breakdown. Like that's the story I expect to hear a few years from now, is that there's going to be some interview with him and he's just going to say, hey, I was in the midst of a full-on paranoid, delusional, schizophrenic breakdown. I saw enemies around me at every corner, and I simply could not accept that through my poor leadership a bad game had been made. Which, at the core of it, for gamers, that's the only part of this story that's even really relevant, is that Mind's Eye is a bad game, not worth buying and not worth playing. Move on with your life and move on to the next game. Don't waste your time in drama and legal actions, which we won't hear the conclusion of legal actions for years, if not decades, and it's never very satisfactory. Unfortunately, in the United States, there is not a corporate death penalty, really, and even if there was, it's not implemented very often. So it's not like a ruling would come down saying Mind's Eye was completely in the wrong and that they owe a whole bunch of back pay to employees or something like that. We have a quote here: "We're definitely pursuing another Mortal Kombat game," in quote, says the co-creator Ed Boon. I feel like in the past Ed Boon claimed full credit for creating Mortal Kombat, but apparently the truth came out, and at least maybe I'm making that up completely in my mind. But yeah, the other quote here is, "There are a lot of pots on the stove." Remember, Warner Brothers, I believe, owns Mortal Kombat, and Warner Brothers in Paramount is being acquired by Paramount. So Warner Brothers Game, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, probably is in a very static mode right now where they are just maintaining things. I don't think they've really announced anything lately, and their last couple of games had some big flops in there. That Suicide Squad game in particular cost them a lot of money. But yeah, I would imagine that there is another Mortal Kombat game being made. I don't know what you do with another Mortal Kombat game. I think you can make it an Injustice 3 easier, because there's only 2 previous of that. But both of those games are just getting too hyper realistic and too bloody. They probably can't go back to 2D or 2.5D art styles, but they probably should just kind of slow things down and not try and go any more bloodiness or any more hyper realisticness. Yeah. I think it would be an interesting comparison here if you took some of the early horror movies like Friday the 13th 1 and looked at the timeline of just how bloody Friday the 13th 1 is versus how bloody the latest Friday the 13th movie is, and compared just how shorter of a timeline it is from the bloodiness of Mortal Kombat 1 to the bloodiness of the most recent Mortal Kombat game, which honestly there's probably more Mortal Kombat games than there are Friday the 13th movies. And certainly you could go back to like Psycho if you're talking horror movies where there's like one scene of blood that's actually shown and everything else is off screen, and that's in black and white. But then you could also use other sources like maybe Cannibal Holocaust, where that's a fairly old movie that was also fairly bloody, but it wasn't really a mainstream movie. So that's why I would say Friday the 13th 1 is probably your best comparison. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that the amount of gore and blood is escalating and has escalated in Mortal Kombat at too high of a rate, each trying to top each other. And even if you were to say take something like Terrifier 1 or whichever of the goriest, bloodiest Terrifier movies you'd pick there, or Hostel, there's still probably way more gore and blood overall in a Mortal Kombat game than even in a movie like Terrifier, which would probably be one of the goriest mainstream movies out there. Mortal Kombat also has somehow taken its lack of a need of really a very strong story and still ruined that by putting in some pretty crazy narrative story elements too. Yeah. Maybe there's a very valid argument that Mortal Kombat really only works as a party game these days because arcades really don't exist, and that limits its amount of success overall. So I would potentially consider making Mortal Kombat very lean and mean, having just 8 characters instead of DLC that just is constantly adding characters, and trying to get it more family friendly enough that it could be in fighting tournaments. Mortal Kombat at EVO, for instance, I don't think ever shows up, and if it does, it's probably Mortal Kombat 2. But yeah, treat it a little bit more like a fighting game and less like a gore fest spectacle game. And yeah, really they should be talking about like rollback netcode more than just new characters and more fatalities. Fatalities in Mortal Kombat or gimmick, certainly, and there is a argument that they have doubled down way too much on the fatalities gimmick when they should have been thinking of new gimmicks instead, which they really haven't found any new gimmicks that have stuck. Yeah, I had a weird dream and I almost never remember my dreams, so I want to kind of say it out loud before I forget it. But it was the idea that it was a horror movie where people moved into this big mansion, but the caretakers of the mansion were like pale, eviscerated, skinny, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre type family. That not that they were doing chainsaw kills per se, but they were killing people that were checking into this like motel mansion type thing. And then halfway through the movie, the big twist is you're following this person, and you're like, oh, this person is going to have to defend themselves against these killers, or get killed by these killers. And instead what happens is the person you're following grabs a sword off the wall and kills not the killers, but some other guests that were like Dog the Bounty Hunter type bounty hunters looking for someone else who had gone missing from the hotel. And so there's this like weird embracing of being the killer, and the killer family embraces them. And it was an interesting idea to just like parody a horror movie, to say, hey, here's a series of movies that could potentially happen where you are following people who are embracing joining up or becoming the new killers in a horror movie instead of surviving or fighting against that. And then the thought in the dream, and this is how I know dreams for me are often extremely literal and kind of lucid in the thought process. I don't think it's fully lucid in that I can just control everything, but the thought for me is oh, the sequel to the movie would be that they would turn the creepy mansion, instead of being a like hotel, hostel, motel. There's another word, I can't think of it, when it's a little house turned into a hotel. But yeah, in the sequel, you turn it into like a summer camp that is happening there, and it's this weird summer camp training program where they are killing off a lot of the campers, but then one of the campers becomes the new killer, and that the movie series would be more about the location, where every movie there is a new person that takes charge and is the primary killer, at least moving away from the original cannibals. Yeah, they were cannibals in the first movie. Yeah, these are very loose, stupid ideas, I know, but and it feels kind of video gamey too, to say one of the people that you're following, which it probably would have to be multiple people you're following for the surprise of it, turns out to be to convert and want to be the killer, which is different from them secretly always having been the killer. So yeah, if I was a extremely rich person, that's where I would waste my millions. There is, I would self-fund the development of a movie like that, or a movie series like that. But also, I probably wouldn't get a return on my investment, and very possibly there wouldn't be an audience there. Yeah, we're doing something very weird today. I am, and I don't know if I like it better or worse. I think I probably like it worse, in that I am really rambling more than usual, instead of having the warm-up section usually burn off that extra energy before I start covering the news. I saw this survey indication, 62% of hardcore gamers. I don't know how you really define people as hardcore gamers, but I would say that's probably people who play more than 3 games a year, 3 new games a year, or buys more than 3 new games a year. No longer are paying full price. Yeah, a survey is suggesting older players are least likely to buy full price games, the report says. Yeah. Inherently, this is a message that needs to be echoed to all game publishers and developers out there, is that the price has gotten too high, and that has given a lot of people enough pause to think about not buying your game at all, or not buying your game at full price. Steam players have long since been unlikely to buy games at full price, and the discounts may not be as good as they once were too. But yeah, there has been a long time since there have been a lot of games that really feel like you need to buy the game on day one, and that probably is hurting a lot of the content creators on YouTube too, in that they are probably buying games on day one if they don't get early access, and reviewing games that other people are not really that interested in because they're not going to buy it on day one, or just reviewing games that aren't even that good. It is potentially an interesting argument that maybe the definition of hardcore is even shifting here, and a hardcore gamer might very well mean that they don't buy games on day one, and that they are less of the type of people who would focus on just the newest and shiniest games. Yeah. But yeah, that is a big problem with the big tent of the gaming community that almost includes every single person on the planet, and that whatever you want to define as the hardcore audience can mean something very different to different people. Gamer is like the term Christian, in that lots and lots of people can claim that they are Christian, but the different denominations are vast, and the variety amongst different denominations are vast. You can easily be in one church and it feel completely different than another church, with the exception of perhaps Catholic churches, which are much more strictly run, and some of the other denominations have pretty strict guidance on how things are done and run too. But yeah, most Protestant churches that claim something like Baptist or Southern Baptist are going to be fairly different from one church to another. And if you have a church that's just completely non-denominational, that's not even claiming a denomination, that can be just about anything, and often is. Alright, moving on. Ed Boon, once a Street Fighter character in Mortal Kombat, has no hard feelings about the movie's cast award game awards jibe. Those things are just part of the 3-decade-long rivalry, he says. I don't even know what this jibe is. And yeah, this Street Fighter movie that's coming out looks pretty ridiculous in the trailer. I don't think it's really designed for fans of Street Fighter. That being said, I don't know how many fans of the Street Fighter games really would have watched the movie anyways. I question heavily, though, if it is also going to be a movie for just fans of movies. It's all a weird thing that one movie theater is doing a summer of movies for like $1, but the movies they're doing are like really old movies, like the Garfield movie was one of them, and they're for kids. So basically they're realizing that in the middle of summer vacation, kids have nothing better to do, so they're trying to get them into the habit of going to the movie theater by showing them old movies, which is an interesting thought. And frankly, movie theaters would be a lot more successful if they were able to just show a whole bunch more movies instead of just the ones that are new to theaters. But yeah, the offering they had wasn't particularly interesting. Of course, I imagine parents were desperate to keep kids busy one way or the other. Yeah. What I think I would want for a Street Fighter movie would just be some really good kung fu people, and I don't even know who the really good kung fu people are. So if I was in charge of making a Street Fighter movie for any reason, I think I would see if I could get a real sumo wrestler from Japan to come up and actually shoot footage and do sumo attacks or something like that. I'd try to see if we could get some judo people, a boxer person, it's just karate people. Like, there are many forms of martial arts, so I would try to get like a list of all the martial arts and bring them in and see what they could show. And that might just be bringing in a lot of instructors on things. Krav Maga, for instance, showed that off more. Yeah. And so I would potentially abandon all the archetypes of people that are actually in the Street Fighter game in favor of interesting people who can actually do interesting martial arts. Now, on the question about who would be best suited to be put in a Mortal Kombat game, I mean, it would either be Ken or Ryu, and it'd probably be Ryu, considering Street Fighter is a Japanese game. You could see Chun-Li also being thrown into Mortal Kombat, but yeah, it would be one of these three that you would throw into Mortal Kombat, or the main bad guy of Street Fighter thrown into Mortal Kombat, which also would make a lot of sense. But I don't think they could do too much, because in Street Fighter you just don't have the goriness and bloodiness and fatalities of it. So if you brought in Ryu and he does like a shuriken attack in Mortal Kombat and it's just like electrifies somebody and burns their skin off, that's gonna be the closest comparison that I think you could do, and it just still would feel weird. And I definitely feel like, I think it's Capcom that has Street Fighter, would never have it happen. I don't see how the Japanese company would think they're benefiting at all by putting their character in a lesser fighting game in their minds. And yeah, the other way I think works probably a lot better, because you could see Sonya Blade and Johnny, is it Johnny Cash, I think, or something. You could see where some of the more human characters could be in a Street Fighter game, and their attacks would just do less violent actions, less blood, less gore, things like that, and their moveset could be very much the same, and that would just imply that maybe they're holding back when they're in the Street Fighter setup. We are in a weird position where we really probably shouldn't be talking about Street Fighter at all just because of the movie, and we shouldn't be talking about Mortal Kombat because there's no Mortal Kombat game that's been announced. It feels like maybe there will be one in 6 months to a year, but not right now. So it is funny how Ed Boon basically did an interview, and now we're getting Video Games Chronicle articles around it for things that aren't really that relevant. Let's see. Assassin's Creed is set to feature in a new speculative stage show with original story. Herodis will feature a story inspired by the games and start its tour in Montreal and Paris. Spectacular stage show, not speculative. I read the word wrong. That is an interesting collaboration on some level, to say that the thought now is that the way to get more people to go to the theater is to integrate video game source material. I don't think that will work all the time, but it might work a few times. Certainly that Hampton rapping musical brought in a different kind of audience, and probably a younger audience, and I imagine the theater audience is getting old and dying out otherwise. This also feels like maybe Ubisoft is just licensing this out in France because they want some extra cash. Yeah. But yeah, whatever is shown, there will be major elements that probably won't be shown in a theater play, and that you're not going to see somebody jump off the top of a tower into a hay bale in a stage show. They might jump from a somewhat high height, but probably not that high of a height, into a hay bale or something like that. But I bet they probably won't jump any higher than their own feet can take them, if they even jump that high. Jumping on stage is usually pretty loud, and kind of rarely done. Although I guess in ballet it's done quite a bit. And yeah, he might have one point where the assassin assassinates somebody from the air. But in a theater, you would more likely think they would sing about it for 20 minutes before they assassinated somebody. Although I'm assuming this is a musical for no good reason. This may very well be more just a talking play. Yeah, it is just said as a spectacular stage show, so that sounds like talking, not singing. It's going to be blending acrobatics, urban parkour, choreographed combat, and physical feats. So they do seem like they're going to show a lot more physicality there. Only in France, I would say, would you have an embracing of the theater of the arts like this and the integration of a video game. I don't think we've ever had a similar thing happen. If it has happened, it would have been done fairly differently, and probably in Japan. There definitely have been like stage shows based off of like Final Fantasy in Japan, but yeah, I don't think in America there's been anything. I don't think anything around the Nintendo property there's been anything. It has been done very few number of times. And yeah, I don't think that there really is that much overlap between the theater fandom and video game fandom. While I've gone to a couple of musicals, they've all been pretty much Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, and yeah, they are longer, old-fashioned experiences, very much different from what you would expect from a video game. It probably wouldn't hurt video games if more story writers embraced a bit of the theatrical elements, but I don't know how many theatrical elements would be left to embrace in a video game that would make him any better. Like, inherently theater is showing its hundreds of years old age, and there's only so much you can do in a live action presentation on a limited amount of square footage on a stage. Which, yeah, almost every theatrical play usually has one gimmick, or at least one gimmick in it, in that it's adding like fog or light shows or something to try and make it stand out. And they probably have long since run out of possible gimmicks they can do. It just kind of feels like it's going back in time. Like this is what it feels a lot like if somebody would add a mod to Assassin's Creed and make it look black and white. Something you could certainly do, but why? Making a play based on Assassin's Creed, even if it's a whole new story, seems weird. And I'm gonna leave it at that. Let's see, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth didn't get story DLC, but Part 3 could if fans want it, the director says. Yeah. Even that, though, I think really confuses the issue when you're already breaking up a game into 3 sections. It is pretty crazy to have any extra content, DLC wise, added to the game. And yeah, they are selling these games at like $60-$70 each, brand new, so it's going to be pretty crazy if they try to rebundle the 3 games into one and then charge a premium of like $210 for all 3 games, which I don't think that really would happen, but maybe half of that, like $105 for all 3 games bundled with maybe some visual DLC that's unique to a deluxe edition rebundling. Yeah. It is odd, certainly, missing out on Final Fantasy VII 2 times in your life. And that definitely feels like what is happening for me and probably a lot of people, in that I did not play Final Fantasy VII when it first came out and have no nostalgia for it. And now they are taking long enough making the 3 remakes of Final Fantasy VII that I don't know if I would ever actually engage with it. And on a certain level, because I know the story somewhat changes, I kind of feel like Final Fantasy is not 3 games that have been remade into 3 new games, or 1 game that's being remade into 3 new games, more than maybe it's 4 games, and that you would want to play the original version of Final Fantasy first anyways. I don't think you really need to do that, but it kind of feels like that is the best experience people will have with it, is to have that nostalgia from the first version of Final Fantasy VII. Alright, moving on. The Dying Light franchise boss steps down after over a decade at Techland. Outgoing Dying Light boss Smectala says the franchise is in good hands. So Dying Light the Beast, I think, came out and it was alright as its own separate game compared to Dying Light 2, which didn't go that well. Regardless, I think he probably also just waited long enough so people won't inherently associate his leaving with Dying Light 2 getting only 76 on Metacritic compared to the Beast getting 79. Although it's important to point out how Metacritic makes up those numbers is just how many of their critics that they have blessed gave it thumbs ups versus how many gave it thumbs downs. which theoretically would point the numbers even higher. Yeah. We'll now have to wait and see if there's any more story to this, if he goes and starts a new company, or if he just properly retires, if he goes and works for some other company. It is very much the rich person's exit from a company, whereas the middle class people of programmers and developers get laid off. But much better for him to potentially step down, maybe on his own terms, than laying off a bunch of people at Techland. Although I'm not sure that there weren't some layoffs at Techland a few months ago. There might have been. It's hard to remember. We get so many layoff announcements. Moving on, Asha Sharma's Xbox overhaul continues as the revamped Series X and S boot up revealed. Going with the green again. It definitely feels like she's doing things. I don't know if she is just trying to establish that things are going to change quickly, or if she's just making a bunch of changes that had already been predetermined as an interim person. I still wonder if it isn't really just Matt Booty that's going to end up being in charge 6 months from now, and that she is just the interim person, a gap filler leader. Yeah, which is really unfair, because I don't know what possibly could be done for me to be 100% sure that her decisions are actually hers. And I hope this isn't just because I'm being sexist in my mind, but she certainly made a mistake by having Matt Booty on stage with her and in announcements with her, and hopefully she will correct that in the future. She needs to be on stage by herself and show that she's in charge, she's actually making the decisions, because there are going to be sexist people out there that just are going to assume some man is actually running the show from behind the scenes. The big assumption there would be Matt Booty. But yeah, regardless of who's really calling the shots, though, Xbox is changing, and in a lot of ways Xbox is changing back to what it was before. A next big improvement would be, it would be a waste of money to rename the Series X and S, but if they announced what the next Xbox controller, Project Helix, was actually called, and it wasn't some ridiculous naming scheme designed to have an X or S in the name, that would be helpful too. And it might be nice if there was just one console with a disk drive and not two versions of the same console, although I doubt that's ever going to happen. Moving on, Take-Two's boss is, quote, deeply disappointed over the wait for the new BioShock. In retrospect, we wasted a lot of time and money. Strauss Zelnick says he's feeling a lot better about the BioShock project. I think gamers are probably slightly disappointed too for how long it's taken to make the next BioShock game as a series, though I don't think it really ever should have been thought of as a annualized type franchise that you would just churn out sequel after sequel after sequel. Each BioShock really needed to be deeply thought through, and I don't think BioShock 2 was deeply thought through enough. I'm not even sure BioShock 3 was deeply thought out well enough. So if they had rushed out a BioShock 4 that was even less impactful, the series would have just gotten worse and worse. You know, there is definitely a feeling that they are mostly doing another BioShock game to compete against the creator of BioShock's game, which I think is called Judas. Yeah. I was thinking it was called Zeus for a second there, but no, it's called Judas. But Judas also is taking forever to develop it, and the creator of BioShock is, I think, notorious for making games that take way too long to develop. There already have been remasters around BioShock. It would be kind of crazy to remaster BioShock again unless you could figure out some way to just make procedural world building, which I could see a spin-off game like that where you go to one region and it is randomly designed, there are randomly placed items, and it is just a roguelite or roguelike experience to get from one place to the other. The story in that case would be practically non-existent, and that would have been an interesting spin-off filler type game. But if you are going to make a mainline game, the story has to be good, and thus the procedural generation of rooms and locations of items would be a problem. Yeah. It definitely feels like we have no real news though around the BioShock 4, which has been in development since 2019. So usually it would take 4 years to develop a game. So they are into at least one reboot. And inherently, a lot of the ideas in BioShock Infinite didn't get actually implemented in BioShock Infinite, and I imagine a lot of those ideas were still trying to be worked on and implemented in BioShock 4. It may also just be that the team that is left that is working at Take-Two to make a BioShock game just doesn't have what it takes to actually finish a product. At some level, I think Take-Two is owned by 2K, and Gearbox, the makers of Borderlands, are also owned by 2K, I think, at this point too, so maybe Take-Two owns both of them, the other way around. Regardless, enough mergers have happened here that you could see the team at Gearbox in Frisco, Texas, just being assigned work to make their game play design squeeze into a BioShock game. Which, yeah, that could work. I wouldn't mind a BioShock Rapture where it's a much bigger landmass with a lot more side quests, but it couldn't get as big as a Borderlands game, though. That would be too big. We also have no idea what BioShock 4, where it's actually going to take place, so it might really be on the surface, where there would be a lot more landmass. Yep. But yeah, this is one of those articles where it's just reminding you that there's no news, and that they have spent way too much money to produce nothing. And I don't think that inherently has to be part of game development, but it often is. But I think a big part of it is its bureaucracies and just raised expectations that are the problem there. Whereas a small developer, for the amount of time and budget that BioShock 4 has already gone through, could have almost certainly made a good enough game and put it out. Moving on, we have a quote: "We got it wrong with Civ 7, the boss says as a major update is announced. What we tried to do was a bridge too far with Civ 7, says the Take-Two CEO. So this is another case where the CEO does an interview and then Video Games Chronicle makes headlines around it that maybe don't really matter. it is interesting that Take-Two is making BioShock and Civ 7 two very different games, but I think a lot of companies probably should have a wide variety of games. And then Take-Two also says Switch 2 isn't the primary platform, but Borderlands 4 port could still come out. Borderlands 4 is still doable, quote unquote. Yeah. At some level, I think they probably should still make Borderlands games, but they could probably slow it down. I could certainly see them taking some of the talent that they have left at Gearbox and have them work on BioShock 4 instead. Honestly, it might be an interesting experiment where you have the entire team at Gearbox work on BioShock 4, and then you have the entire team that's working on BioShock 4 work on Borderlands 5. That way it could be fresh eyes on a concept. Yeah, I'm a little surprised that doesn't happen more often, and that it is like the people at Gearbox are very much pigeonholed to making Borderlands games, and I don't think they particularly are super happy with that. So, and I imagine the people in charge of making BioShock are pigeonholed to making BioShock games, and I'm sure they're not super happy with that either. It would be an interesting experiment, a very risky experiment, to just have them trade places. It's a Mad Hatter type plan to have the developers trade places. It's something I might bring up and ask them if they were interested in it, but I imagine they'd be afraid of change and say no matter what. Anyways, that brings us to the Gematsu articles, which has taken way too long. So before I start going through the Gematsu articles, I'm going to take a bathroom break, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back, so when I'll go through the Gamatsu articles and try and get through this fairly quickly. Yeah, it is really not smart as a content creator to sound exhausted by going through the news yourself, but yeah, that does happen. And I don't really know a way to automate the process and speed it up to curate it or to manually curate it and speed up the process. Let's see. Shikondo Blue Pieta details boss characters, which, yeah, it looks like there's kind of a wide variety of 2D animations here for boss characters. But I don't really know what kind of game it even is. Very creepy character there. It's a shoot 'em up side-scrolling game, so yeah. That is a strange group of boss characters, knowing it's a shoot 'em up game. And it does make me question what the scale of these characters are going to be. Because yeah, a side-scrolling shoot 'em up game feels to me like you could, a lot of different scales could exist. Yeah. Here's one boss character, and we can see it's fairly big, taking up the full totality of the screen almost. Or a quarter of the screen at least. Alright, move on. The Blood West DLC Scavengers launches June 3rd. Okay. Blood West DLC Scavengers would rely on Blood West itself. Which Blood West is rated very positively. And is a single player only game. Although I do kind of question whether I would ever actually play a game like this. It is a weird, different kind of game from the looks of it, though. If I had more free time and energy, I could see playing this just for a bit of variety. The multiplayer kaiju action game Beastlink has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. We're starting to get quite a few kaiju games lately. Let's see. The Myst and Riven remakes are coming to the PS5, PSVR 2 on May 19th. With an update saying the Riven remake is coming to the Xbox Series also. Weirdly though, I would have thought all of those games had come out for consoles, but I guess it does highlight that Cyan never really had that much extra money for extra console development. Yeah. While I'm playing Blueprints, there are definitely some comparisons you can make to Myst and Riven. In a lot of ways, I think Blueprints adopts some of the worst parts of Riven, in that it's asking you to learn an entirely new language in Blueprints, and you kind of have to do that in Riven too. But then there definitely are completely different standards that these games are held to, because they're based off of very old games. And I think just a better experience overall in Myst 1. Blueprints, there is no human being around ever. You just get letters from other people, as far as I can tell. Which made sense in the old days when you're making a game like Myst, but even Myst 1 had video footage of other people talking to you. There is no video footage of people talking to you in Blueprints. Riven actually doesn't have as much video footage. You see some people off in the distance, and that's about it. But yeah, by far, I'd say Myst and Riven will stand the test of time and still be talked about in decades, where I cannot guarantee the same thing for Blueprints. But yeah, it is also worth remembering though that Cyan relatively recently laid off a bunch of their new employees that they hired back up to try and be a company that could actually make new games, where before then, for decades, they were more of a holding company that was just re-releasing and remastering or making profits from the sales of the old Myst games. And I think that is very likely where Cyan is now too, is that it is just going to stay around in name as a company, and they're going to get sales from the Myst and Riven remakes, but a Myst 3 remake is probably never coming. The odds of it coming was kind of low in the first place. There definitely was some thoughts that they'd make a Myst 3 that wasn't the same Myst 3, as that was the first game not actually made by Cyan and handed over to Ubisoft instead, where Ubisoft made Myst 3, 4, and 5, while Cyan tried to make a puzzle MMO game for, I think, over a decade and didn't get very successful on that, making Uru, which is it's kind of a single player way to play it online. There's a Uru online, and then the one that is easier to purchase is a single player version of Uru that has a lot less in it, and it obviously isn't an MMO. The most recent games that are new from Myst, from Cyan, would be Firmament, which didn't sell particularly well, and the game before that, Abduction, didn't sell particularly well. Also, Cyan tried to be a publisher for a brief second there and published a different game that really didn't sell well. I do also have to question whether Myst as a concept even makes sense. And I mean, they probably need to use the name Myst, otherwise people won't buy the game, but the idea of linking books and the types of puzzles and the way the games are designed in Myst may just not make sense now with people's shortened attention spans. I do, though, think that the idea of magical portals that take you somewhere different is really cool and a great mechanic. And it is weird that in Blueprints, up until this point at least, I have not found any level of magical portals or magic really at all, other than the most obvious magic that the house rearranges itself based on your own designs. But yeah, there definitely was a point halfway through Blueprints where I was really expecting to open the door and have the door be a magical portal that would take me somewhere. I was assuming it would take me to unique and special rooms in the house, or just maybe random rooms in the house. But yeah, had there been a system like that implemented, it actually might have helped quite a bit, because from that concept it would have eliminated a lot of the randomness of how the house gets laid out in Blueprints. There is an interesting contrast there, that Blueprints has you design the land mass in the house, where Cyan games, Myst and Riven, are worlds that are designed by artistic hands and very much static in their floor plan and layout. I don't actually own the remake of Myst. I own so many other versions of it, but yeah, right now it's not discounted heavily enough to justify spending $30 to play yet another version of it. It might have been an interesting contrast if I was to go back and play it in contrast to Blueprints, but that certainly would also just be a step backward in my mind, in that I'm just not playing new games at that point. Cyan Worlds. Firmament is mostly positive with that many reviews. Abduction is mostly positive. And there's a whole bunch of older versions of Myst. Of course, this isn't including Myst 3 or 4, but weirdly does include Myst 5, which is, I think, by far the worst Myst game, because it really just breaks what kind of puzzle mechanics had existed up until that point, and you can see it is mixed reviewed. Abduction, by being a differently named game, played very different in its mechanic, and it basically was one mechanic, which is probably part of the problem. Yeah. And then I guess they got the rights back from Ubisoft from Myst 3. Myst 4, also mixed reviewed. Yeah. Well, that still was pretty much the same type of puzzles. It did have a touching mechanic where you got one of 3 different endings, where all the other games only gave you a good ending and a bad ending option depending on what you did, whereas the touching mechanic in Myst 4 could give you several different endings based on what you had done throughout the entirety of the experience. I would say Myst 4's animation by far was the best live action integration, full motion video integration video of the whole series. But then they dropped that for 3D CGI in Myst 5, and Myst 5 looks a lot worse. And yeah, I haven't actually played Firmament, so I can't really speak to it myself, but yeah, it didn't feel like people really were super hyped on it, and that may very well just be a case that there's not a lot of appetite for a game from Cyan that feels like a Myst game that isn't in the Myst universe. Riven, on the other hand, as a remake, is rated very positively, but as a remake it also changes some things, so there is a real argument to playing Riven, which then goes back to a real argument to playing the Myst remake. But I don't think anything has really changed in the Myst remake from real Myst, at least. Yeah, and that is a long explainer that is necessary around the Myst series, which almost certainly creates a situation where a lot of people are overwhelmed and unwilling to jump into the Myst series. It does make a good argument that maybe puzzle games shouldn't be a series. While Blueprints, for example, could have a sequel game, and The Witness in particular could very easily have a sequel game because it didn't really have any story around it, I just don't think it benefits do have sequel names for puzzle games. The Witness might be the exception there. I could see a Witness 2 coming out, where it's just the exact same puzzles but more in a new island. But there probably then wouldn't be any new gimmicks if it's the exact same puzzles. So it would have to be a whole new set of completely different types of puzzles if you were going to make a Witness 2 for there to be a whole new set of gimmicks. Yeah, and the Witness as a game wasn't really moddable, so if there was an idea as far as a new gimmick that could be put in it, it would have to be programmed by the original creator. Whereas Portal 2, for example, was somewhat moddable, and that's why there are at least a couple of fan-made mods that take the ideas and add new gimmicks and new ideas to it. Moving on, Dark Scrolls launches May 28th. Wasn't Dark Scrolls the name of that cartoon, Pirates of Blackwater? No. I think it was called Dark Scrolls, Pirates of Blackwater. That was a cartoon that I probably only saw a couple episodes, but I was kind of enthralled with it. Unfortunately, like many of those 80s, 90s cartoons, it was probably 90s or even 2000s era, it didn't actually have an ending. Which, yeah, if there was going to be a remake of something, remake that and give it a proper single season ending. Into the Slimy Mines launches May 29th. There's Dark Scrolls. We can see it's already on the fall list. Game Pass adds Forza Horizon 6, Mixtape, Subnautica 2 Early Access, and more in the early to mid-May. This is interesting for a game to be released part of Game Pass in early access. Of course, the story around Subnautica 2 is, in particular, very weird. So, I'm not sure I've seen anything else early access released on Game Pass. And that you would kind of think that if you are paying for a subscription service, you don't want the door open that half of the games you get from that subscription service are early access games that are unfinished. Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero and the Legend of Heroes Trails to Azure is coming to PS5 and Switch 2. Legend of Heroes in the Trails series. Every time I hear about it, it seems to be bigger than what I thought it was. Horizon Hunters Gathering is, it's Horizon Hunters Gatherings. Second closed test is set for May 22nd to 25th. This is that weird looking, more cartoony Horizon spin-off game that I suspect may have just been a completely different game that had been bought by PlayStation and they slapped the Horizon name on it. That being said, I don't know if that's really a bad thing because people weren't particularly in love with the Horizon second game anyways, and Sony and Guerrilla Games want to do something with the Horizon brand, so this weird spin-off game might give them a direction to revitalizing Horizon. Or it may just give them a bunch of money or enough money to continue doing to continue developing a Horizon 3. Yeah. As far as screenshots go, question here will come down to an audience, since it's an online co-op game. Like, if nobody is playing the game, then it'll be dead in the water, and there's unfortunately a high chance of that being the case for any online co-op game or online focused game. Saturday AM Battle Manga Nilly the Dallas and Viper trailer. That is a weird name for a game, Saturday AM Battle Manga. I don't know what that means at all, because a manga is a book, so Saturday AM as in like Saturday morning cartoons does not really connect there. Battle mangas, sure, there are plenty of mangas out there around battling. Weirdly though, this guy is showing a card of some sort. It does feel like this is just a bunch of random words being picked from a non-native English speaker, or some kind of weird translation error into something that makes no sense. Serial World limited time demo is now available. Looks like it's a card game of some sort. Yeah. This definitely feels like this was probably a Western studio that was very much inspired by anime fighting shows, or even mangas, but I'd imagine more anime, because mangas don't really cross over the ocean too much. It's too expensive to ship books or translate books and print them in other countries. There's been a couple companies that have tried it, but yeah, manga really should be a lot more popular than it is around the world, and it just isn't. And only the biggest manga things like One Piece get translated. Even looking at the screenshot though, it looks like it's just a fighting game, which I don't get the manga part there. If they were going to say manga, they would have had to make the game black and white, which wouldn't have made a lot of sense for a video game. Serial World isn't on the follow list, so I'll add it to the follow list now. And then a game called Black Jacket launches May 12th for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. It's a blackjack inspired roguelite deck builder. Well, on that aspect, there might be something a little bit more interesting there compared to Balatro, but I also wouldn't be surprised if in the long run I would have been bored playing this game in the same way I got bored playing Balatro. Blackjack perhaps limits the number of cards you actually are going to interact with, which you would think would mean you need those cards to be more powerful and more impactful individually. But it might just make a whole bunch of weirdness and mean you have to learn a lot of stuff that actually isn't blackjack. Which that is what it feels like is happening in this game. Is that it just increasingly is going to be loosely based off of blackjack. It is an interesting contrast, and I would probably chalk it up just to a matter of individual opinion as to whether you prefer a dark visual theme for a gambling addiction narrative in a gambling game like this, compared to the bright, colorful theme of Balatro, which doesn't really match how incredibly difficult Balatro is. I think this theme is probably more accurate in giving the feel of how difficult winning at this game is probably going to be. It does seem like there are other elements to the game that might give you more options, whereas in Balatro there really weren't. Even having unlocked everything, there really still weren't enough options in the game to help you win. Alright, well that's going to bring us to Gaming on Linux articles. Valve has released a new Steam controller in puck CAD files for modders. I don't know if I thought of anything for the controller itself that would be helpful, but yeah. Inherently, I guess if there was a newer version of the puck by either Valve or a third party that had an audio in jack, or if audio could go through the puck and then there was an audio out headphone adapter, that would be nice. It does just kind of feel like the framework. There should probably be at the bottom of all controllers a slot that is USB-C and recessed, and in that recessed cutout of a square you can add, for maybe $10, $20, even $30 extra, a headphone jack if you want it, maybe a volume wheel on the headphone jack while you're at it, which wouldn't be a terrible thought. And yeah, that way the controller itself could be pretty cheap, but it could be plugged in from the top or the bottom, and you could potentially put some other accessory there. Although I don't know what the other accessory would really need to be. Like a micro SD card reader might make some sense if you wanted to take with your controller some save files, particularly if Steam could detect that and say, hey, we'll put your save files on this card instead of on the micro SD card, instead of on the hard drive on your computer, would be the other option where save files would go. But yeah, I think that's kind of it. Maybe extendable battery. Other mods for this, I don't think would change too much using the CAD files, although maybe you could use the CAD files to extensively take apart and change the grips if people, say, found they were angled a little weird, or if they found some way that they could add a little bit of plastic here or there to add other features. It'll be interesting to see if anybody other than like dbrand do anything with these CAD files, whereas dbrand is just going to make skins for it. Let's see, the multiplayer kaiju action game Beastlink looks like it has potential. Yeah, there is seemingly a level of visual polish being shown here. When you actually get into gameplay, I imagine you're going to be zoomed out enough that visual polish isn't even going to be that necessary. It's going to come down more to buildings and how many buildings are in an area and how destructible is the environment. It seems weirdly like you play as humans, and a human with a gun here makes no sense at all. And driving a tank against kaiju spiders doesn't really make sense. So There might be two character classes effectively that are failures, when the logic here would be you want to play as the kaiju destroying the world, and if you're not playing as a kaiju, you would want something stronger than just tanks and helicopters. Let's see, Subnautica 2 is, quote, good to go on the Steam Deck for early access launch. We'll move on. The highly rated adventure game Shadows of the Afterland adds full controller support. And see, these Gaming on Linux articles are opened with my macro, my old macro, so I'm not getting duplicates here, but my new code, if it was enabled, would have opened up these same articles with a lot of duplicate code. The latest stable Steam update brings full Steam controller support. Interesting. Yeah. I guess it's pretty easy to say full controller support, though. The Steam controller more popular than Valve expected. They're working on stock issues. Here's the quote, really small. Steam controller ran out faster than we anticipated, and we hate that not everyone who wanted one was able to get it. We're working on getting more in stock, and we'll have an update on expected timeline soon. Yeah. So yeah, no promises there, but however many they had, they sold out. Yeah. At some level, I probably could be a scalper if I thought it was morally acceptable and had the time to do it and the energy to do it. I probably would find sales and get things early enough that I could buy things and then try and sell them for some level of profit on something like eBay. But I mean, I think that probably is more worth work than it's worth it. Unfortunately, it is the case that a lot of jobs, as it's really hard to keep and get jobs in the United States, a lot of jobs are centered around some level of unethicalness, and pretty much all jobs are centered around a small level of unethicalness because they're built around taking money from people who really probably can't afford to lose that money and shouldn't lose that money. Yeah, but yeah, if there was massive profits in scalping, I could see myself getting desperate enough to just do that. But I don't think there actually is. I think there's a whole bunch of people who buy things and think that they're going to make a bunch of profit for it, and then they get left in the lurch with the objects that they may not actually want. Speaking of capitalism, you pay off your debts to a greedy landlord in a seriously charming deck builder called Crop Deck. So is this a sharecropping experience? That was a great way that greedy landlords in the past instituted something close to slavery once slavery had been eliminated. Sharecropping, kind of not too far away from being a peasant in the old days. Conan Exiles Enhanced is out, a free upgrade for everyone with Steam Deck improvements. Do we want to hit the launch trailer? Not if it says nudity. Conan Exiles. Weirdly, probably should have been more popular, and the nudity, I don't know, it really hurt it, but it only helped it a little bit when it first launched. It got some people's accounts banned on Twitch, and it got some press because of it. I was not aware until a couple of days ago that there actually were Conan movies that are more recent than the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan movies. Like, I imagine they are kind of in the same vein as like young Indiana Jones movies, things that are just not really considered canon. And yeah, plenty of old Arnold Schwarzenegger movies have been remade. But yeah, I don't think Conan the Barbarian as a comic is particularly that popular at the moment, and I don't know if it ever was super popular. Those movies in the old days were easy to get the rights to and cheap to make. Nowadays they don't make cheap and easy movies, so I would be very surprised if there was a new Conan movie that came to theaters. I'm not sure what you could really get away with something like that anyways. So Conan Exiles might be the closest thing to what we would see. You know what I should do is, it just occurs to me, is I can hit the play button for my own attention on my second monitor. And I guess I can slightly describe it. We'll go ahead and close Conan Exiles in the process. So yeah, the trailer is showing a guy and other characters walking around looking over the horizon of worlds. Now they're chopping trees and mining rocks and doing survival things, crafting, which that is the big problem with Conan Exiles, is that it is this weird survival base building game, when I would have expected it would have just been more of a fantasy adventure game where you're going places and attacking and killing things and weren't building a base by any means. There's a character that oddly looks magical, and there's a lot of characters that are not barbarian class in the game. There are these giant godlike creatures that I know you can summon. And show off a couple of those. So yeah, that trailer was safe for work, but I'm not going to show it again. And yeah, that trailer didn't really show anything too new compared to the last time I'd seen Conan Exiles. Moving on, Shapes 2 is thoroughly a chilled time building up a sharp cutting factory. Shape cutting factory. Hit play here. So it is kind of a Factorio type thing. Looks like there might be a decent amount of programming associated with it. And it definitely looks like the kind of game I wouldn't really want to put my time into. Yeah, let's stop the trailer here. I don't think you're going to see too much more from that. Here's Riven. I don't know why the link to Riven is open this far away. Discord is finally less of a nuisance to update on Linux. Discord team just revealed another major update to the social chat platform, and Linux got a little attention this time too. Up until now, Discord on Linux had no auto update ability. Depending on how you installed it, you might need to download it fresh on every major update. That's no longer a problem, as they have finally rolled out an automatic Rust-based updater for Linux, so it updates itself just like it does on Windows. Additionally, they're now supporting .rpm, .pkg, .tar, .zst package formats for installation. Those, I assume, are all different things, but they're all squished together here. Yeah, RPMs, packages, tar balls, ZST. I'm not familiar with ZSTs. Are all package file extension file formats. Although the file extensions on Linux are not really necessary and don't really mean anything to Linux unless you have a program that is interpreting them, because there is just an executable marker on all files to make it executable. The extension might tell them what program to use instead of making it to execute it, but usually it doesn't even do that much. And yeah, even on Windows, the .exe extensions and .coms and you don't see .coms or .bats too much these days. They're really stupid as far as file formats go, and should be replaced with something that makes better sense to your average person who doesn't likely know that .exe stands for executable. Yeah. Moving on, here's Shape Z, which is out of early access on my wish list, but maybe I should think about taking it off the wish list. A unique deck builder called Moon Sigil Atlas arrives May 28th. No energy, no mana, just space. Interesting. Into the Slimy Mines. Article is open here. A engineering puzzle game, UVS-NIR Normana, arrives from the Zachtronics team at Coincidence. So there should be another Zachtronics-like game, programming type game. Although, I haven't really found a Zachtronics game I really liked, even though I have liked programming games in the past. And I'm not sure. There's a great chance that this is going to be the one I would really like. Like, I played one of their programming games and found it fairly lackluster because it wasn't really about programming, and you can see here this really isn't going to be that much about actually programming in text form as much as it is interpreting programming concepts into a whole new way of depicting things and thinking of things, a lot of which looks like it is maybe music based. Yeah. I'll put it on the follow list though, just to follow it. Unity AI is out in open beta to give developers the fabled Make Game button, which there's no way that is going to develop anything great. That sounds sounds like this is once again creating a crutch for people who are not going to develop the core skills and the core way of thinking and the creativity that can only come from the flawed human brain to make something interesting. And you can see in this feature trailer how the people making these trailers aren't even particularly creative. and are really throwing in just random aspects. So it definitely feels like they may have used AI to tell them how to make a trailer. So yeah, through that trailer, they're introducing here, Gaming Online says, the concept of AI flips. But yeah, through that trailer, they're saying build a demolition derby arena. When's the last time anybody has cared about demolition derby games? Like, it would have had to have been a long time ago, 20, 30 years ago. There's one demolition derby series that I know of that was somewhat popular. It's just a terrible genre and a terrible concept to begin with. And then it makes an arena that just looks like a Colosseum, Greek, Roman type arena for no good reason, when if it was a demolition derby, the kind of arena it would be in would be a modern arena. And it uses their assets to make it, so you would have to provide it with either multiple assets as an option, or only make what is provided. So all it really did when it made the arena was copy and paste 3D models around in a circular fashion, circular arena-like fashion. Then it brings in your assets for a car, while showing no way that the code would actually work, that the car would move, and that a gun attached to the car would shoot. And then it ADD throws in robots cheering for no reason. Like, there is no consistency there. There's nothing creative to explain the inconsistency. Like, if you started from the concept of you want to be in a dystopian world where robots only exist and they enjoy seeing humans or robotic cars fight each other, that's the beginning of an idea. You have to then flesh that out to a story, and how that story is going to really apply to a good gameplay mechanic, which Demolition Derby as a gameplay mechanic probably isn't that good, and certainly isn't very welcome or wanted. Still, you wouldn't have an arena that looks like a Roman Colosseum, though. So the good news is we will be able to identify AI flips for, I think, a long time from now. Even if they don't disclose on Steam that they're using AI, and if Steam changes its rules to explicitly say this kind of AI is fine. The bad thing is this is just going to have more and more people be unable to code and program or understand code and programming because they are just heavily relying on AI. Yeah. It is kind of funny. We had sci-fi movies like this where hackers potentially would save the day by making viruses that would attack AIs, and there is some effort of astroturfing information that might be scanned by AI so that it is forever unclean and unable to spout correct information by people just posting absolutely obvious to humans wrong answers. And the internet has always been full of sarcastic people with wrong answers, which really shows that AI is never going to be accurate. But yeah, Terminator certainly was afraid of Skynet as an AI taking over, but we are more likely to have AI just destroy the creativity of mankind if we're not careful, and destroy the gaming development community. Meanwhile, it's also worth pointing out that Unity is still buggy and has problems. Blueprints is a Unity game. The audio crashes all the time. I've seen visual glitches. I've seen items put in the wrong position as a glitch. For a puzzle game that has only one human character, it shouldn't be anywhere as buggy as it is, and yet that is fairly consistent amongst Unity developers. And a lot of that may fall on the shoulders of the programmers themselves, but a lot of it is like the audio engine crashing, I think, systemic to Unity. And that's really where Unity should be trying to improve things, is to have more rock solid performance with stability and frames per second, instead of pushing out yet another fad thing to try and get their stock price up, which is what I imagine the only thing they care about, which is just more reason to go to something like Godot instead, where Godot almost certainly would have very little motivation to add AI into its engine, because they don't have a share price they're trying to goose up. Let's see. Steam controller goes out of stock as Valve gets a ton of game console shipments. So a ton here could be the actual weight, or a ton could be 2,000 units versus 2,000 pounds, which is what a ton would mean, US pounds. But also ton probably doesn't mean either one of those, and it's just a generic term. If it really was the case that the consoles themselves were just around the corner of being delivered, I don't know why they would have sold the controllers separately at that point. Yeah. And if Valve really is getting a ton of console shipments, then yeah, I guess we might be close to them actually coming out and announcing a price. I imagine they will announce the price right when it is available for purchase. And honestly, if things were just slightly different, I might consider just getting the Steam machine. Of course, I already have a new computer I haven't put together, which frankly is going to be a year old by the time I put it together. But then, so it really wouldn't justify buying one for myself. And while I would love for my nieces and nephews to potentially have a Steam machine, they also don't have the free time to actually do anything with it, and it would be too expensive a gift for that. Yeah, it really kind of undercuts the whole idea of Steam Family a lot more than I thought it would, when you start to realize that kids nowadays in particular have a ton of homework and a ton of other obligations usually, and they are not just the gamer slobs like I was, where I had a ton of free time playing video games because I was not doing any extracurricular activities, and I was not needing to do any homework, or not doing any homework at all. Let's see. Gaming on Linux has some early thoughts on this new Steam controller. I don't know what he might say that's particularly too different. There is something interesting in that this is a 3-pin connector, because it makes me wonder if when the puck is directly touching the controller, if it is sending any data at all, or if it is just a ground pin, and a, I assume, 5-volt DC digital positive pin. I assume 5-volt. It would be interesting, I guess, if it was quick charging without using the USB extra pins to negotiate the voltage. You could do I2 squared connections with 2 wires and send data and power. That is possible, so there is a possibility that it's just connecting through a different kind of standard instead of USB-C, which has a whole bunch more connectors. Yeah. Here you can see what the new Steam controller looks like versus the old Steam controller. Looks like a very different, weirdly inverted, almost PlayStation-like controller, but not really, with way too much of an emphasis on the touchpads. Yeah. They definitely, I think, have done it a lot better. And you can see a sign of the times, too, that the colors in the button prompts have been now abandoned to just being all white. Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of internal accessibility and adjustable things, at least on SteamOS. Here's your banana for scale. There is a Bluetooth mode, and it's kind of a weird key combination that you have to, they don't really tell you about, to put this controller in Bluetooth mode to get it to work with like an Android cell phone. Let's see. The trackpads and back grip buttons don't seem to work outside of Steam in games with GE Proton online. They just act as a plain Xbox styled controller. On the Steam Deck, they had like a gecko mode, I think is what they called it, where if the Steam client on desktop mode is closed, the controller inputs really revert to a very basic Xbox type input, and you don't get the ability to pop up a keyboard on desktop mode if the Steam client is closed, which it sucks that that is built into the Steam client and not its own separate thing, because you could certainly see people wanting the keyboard pop-up functionality on the Steam Deck on desktop mode, but they not wanting their Steam client to be logged in and open. Yeah, I think the price is the main conversation here, is that at $100 it's all right, but it's not great. Certainly isn't revolutionary as a controller. Moving on, prepare to rig the market in slots and stocks, a deck building slot machine roguelite. So, yeah, Blueprints has a slot machine mechanic that's really bad. It is really boring and not something I'd ever really want to engage with. At least in this case, the slot machine mechanic seems to be very more of a very higher chance of success of actually getting something that would let you win, or just something that looks interesting. The unique module building tower defense game Wireworks just got much bigger. I've seen this game before, and I think I'd mostly dismissed it just because of the visuals. But seems like there is a few people that are enjoying it and overlooking perhaps some rough graphics, which I think is the main problem here, is that a game like this with 2-3 times better graphics would get a lot more attention and probably sell a lot better. That brings us to GameDeveloper.com articles. Valve to restock Steam controller after it sells out in a day. Company says it ran out faster than they anticipated. New Remedy CEO wants to preserve small budgets and break into Asia. That is interesting. I don't know how that specifically works for Remedy, though. At a certain level, the idea of preserving small budgets makes some sense, but that may also be CEO talk for we just want to keep the payroll down and not pay developers what they should be paid. Breaking into Asia with Control or other Remedy games is interesting. I don't know how you do that, particularly with Control and the idea of SCPs. I don't know if there's a lot of SCP things that would feel Asian or Asian focused, and it might very well be culturally contradictory to try to bring SCPs to China or Japan instead of talking about the kinds of yokai in Japan, for instance, that already have stories and narratives around them. Yeah. So, if we got down to the gameplay mechanics of Remedy games, I don't know if there's anything too exciting there too. Using a phrase of breaking into Asia is a pretty old phrase these days. It's something that they would have talked about 10-20 years ago, is trying to break into the Asian markets. Now we've already passed into the phase of trying to break into the Middle Eastern markets. I think we may now be into a phase of more just trying to break into Indian markets, maybe African markets, maybe Eastern European and just European Union in general markets, or South American markets. They are looking for more emerging markets generally. Most companies of all kinds of sectors, let alone games. There is very likely a large amount of saturation in Asian markets for games where you are fighting monsters, like you might do in this newest Control spin-off game. There is a danger certainly too that his desire to break into Asia really just means he wants Tencent to come in and buy part of the company. That being said, as much as fear-mongering is somewhat justified around Tencent, they did help Daedalic dig itself into the ground and make the Golem game. Tencent has invested in a lot of companies and not really driven too many of them into the ground, other than Daedalic. The others seem to have mostly benefited by the extra funding. Let's see, Metacore restructuring to the tune of up to 160 redundancies. The Brawl Stars studio and major shareholder Supercell is going to acquire the company. I don't know who Metacore is, but I guess they made Merge Mansion and they had 160 people to lay off, which is Seems like a lot of people to even have on staff for a mobile game company. The KinForge developer Seeker Entertainment is furloughing staff. The studio is exploring fundraising opportunities while encouraging staff to be aggressive with their job hunts. What country are they in that you can furlough staff instead of just having to say you're laying them off? Maybe America. Although, I think pretty much you can say somebody is furloughed in America, but they can certainly claim that they have been laid off if they haven't been paid in a certain amount of time. But who knows what that amount of time might be. It might be pretty ridiculous. A lot of people living paycheck to paycheck, so missing even a day or an hour worth of work can be impossibly devastating, let alone somebody being furloughed for weeks, months, years. I don't think I've ever heard of a story of somebody being furloughed and then being brought back and that actually being a happy experience. If that would happen, is unlikely. This KinForge looks interesting in this one screenshot, but that doesn't really mean much. Let's see. GameStop has tabled its $55.5 billion takeover bid for eBay. The U.S. video game retailer said the deal would require $20 billion in debt financing, which means if they were to buy eBay would inherently start off with an extra $20 billion in debt. I heard, and this sounds very plausible, that the CEO, which it is amazing that he somehow became the CEO of GameStop through the help of just stupid people on Reddit, I think. That's how he became the CEO. But I've heard that the CEO, Ryan Cohen, will get some huge bonus if he can raise the share price of GameStop, and if this acquisition went through, it very possibly would raise GameStop's share price in a very artificial way. Yeah. Now when they say table here, I think they mean bring to the table, whereas in my mind table would mean that they aren't talking about it anymore. Yeah. Here they're talking about GAAP, the generally acceptable accounting procedure, which lets you manipulate your books and cook your books quite a bit in the United States, and basically makes it so you don't really have to disclose, or you write off all of your expenditures and cost. The best way to explain it is a meme I just saw earlier today, where a corporation says we made $100 million last year, but we spent $90 million, so we only owe taxes on the $10 million difference, whereas an individual makes, for nice round numbers, let's say an individual makes $100,000 in a year and then spends $90,000 paying bills and just covering costs. Well, the individual has to pay taxes on all $100,000 of that for the most part. Like, they don't get anywhere close to the same amount of deductions that a corporation can get. And yeah, that's not exclusively what Gap does, but it is at the center of the problem with capitalism, is that they have found ways to cheat the system, both on taxes and on lying to shareholders what their real value is. I would not value eBay anywhere close to what they're offering here, $55 billion, for as terrible as a company as it is. And it must have been spun off from Stripe, because I was pretty sure Stripe owned eBay. Stripe owns PayPal, and I thought PayPal was owned eBay, but maybe they got rid of that. Let's see. And then our last game developer story here is Wizards of the Coast has declined to voluntarily recognize Game Workers Union. Quote, when we spoke up about a desire to unionize, they responded only to the press, end quote. This is pretty common. I don't know of more than a couple of stories in my entire life I've heard of a company actually agreeing to allow the unionization to happen without it going through legal proceedings and processes. And there are definitely some bad unions where a bad union might take control of a company and just make it stay as bad as it was. This is an oddly artsy logo for a United Wizards of the Coast. But yeah, unionization is weak in the United States, and they are going to have to fight for their rights to unionize and negotiate for better terms. And in the long run, I think a unionization of Wizards of the Coast probably will be slightly better, but maybe only slightly better, because you will immediately have all the management at Wizards of the Coast blaming all the problems that pre-existed around that company on the union and on the fact that they're constrained by the union. Alright, well then that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam. Let's move through this as quickly as possible. If I don't think the game is good enough to do anything, I'll swipe down. If I think there's a chance that I'm interested in it, I'll put it on the follow list and swipe to the right to leave it open for the pretense of making YouTube shorts. If I just think it deserves a YouTube short, but personally I'm not interested in it, I will just swipe to the right and not put it on the follow list. This looks like this is an idle game, desktop game. I'm going to say no to that. Yeah, I don't think those types of games are quality enough. I don't really expect anybody actually plays desktop games that aren't full screen, and if they do, I don't think that audience is big enough to justify making footage around it. Still haven't gotten my code to speed up the slideshows. Really, I should at this point not try to do the slideshow speed up and instead try to get other things done instead, because I put too much attempts into speeding up the slideshows. And unfortunately, I also there was a movie like this where it's a dog that can see ghosts that came out not too long ago as an indie movie. Lost my train of thought there, I think. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, it's a shame I spent extra time to reduce the resolution of the images that were being loaded, and it didn't actually save me any RAM. far as I could tell. Might go back and try that again later, but yeah. I thought I had hit on something that could potentially save me a lot of RAM, although what would be wiser is just building a new computer that would have more RAM in it anyways. And yeah. It is interesting, I suppose, that for some AMD CPUs, having 2 sticks of RAM means the RAM can run faster than having 4 sticks of RAM. At least that's my understanding of how the situation sometimes is. You would think that there would just be a feature in the motherboards or in the operating system where you would then have it turn off 2 sticks of RAM and just not use them if it was going to use only the faster stuff. Maybe it would have to permanently turn off the RAM, or maybe it could just temporarily use the RAM for other things. Of course, that's creating a solution to a problem after the fact, when you really should just have had a solution where that wasn't a problem. And see, that might very well be DDR4 RAM only, not DDR5 or 6 RAM. I would assume it is DDR4 RAM that has that issue with AMD CPUs, I think specifically. Yeah. I was really hoping when I started looking through all the new games that I would find a whole bunch of hidden gems or find games that other people are missing, or find games before other people find them. And there's really only so much truth to that. Like, hidden gems in particular basically never happen. Finding games before other people find it, sure, does happen, but only to a small level, because usually it's just like this game is in early access or this game is not out yet. Yeah. It definitely doesn't feel like it gave me as much of an advantage as I would have liked. Flip my room. Knocking down walls to flip a room is not really realistic for flipping a room. And if you're flipping a house, that's one thing. Flipping a room is not a thing. Motor slice is very positive. That is perhaps one of the closest thing to a hidden gem that if I was going to rush, I could see putting it out now and buying it now and trying to cover it. Of course, my experience of buying games new and trying to play them day one has not been particularly successful. You basically have to live stream the games day one. I'll take this off the follow list to even have a chance. Some of these games are getting more people playing them and reviewing them than we have had in the past. This is probably nothing, but I'm going to give it a chance. I have been complaining about pain in my backside sitting for so long. And weirdly, the closest solution I've found so far is just cycling between two completely different types of cushions to add and swap out, and taking aspirin, which the problem with taking aspirin when you're feeling pain, particularly like pressure pain and physical pain, is you're not really dealing with the problem, so very easily you are going to just be creating a bigger problem down the line or hurting yourself. Yeah. Does feel like there's some maybe acid flip garbage card games that were rushed out for the fest. Yeah, I also complain about my sleep schedule, and this may be another day where I woke up just barely in time and actually started streaming late today, and then may go back to sleep once I'm done. I don't think, though, I could really say it's Blueprints that is really exhausting me that much, at least not physically. It's exhausting me mentally, and frustrating me mentally in some aspects. We really haven't found a lot of hidden object point and click type games lately. And if you want any statistics here, I've been running auto games on Pokemon TCG Pocket for basically 3 hours, and roughly just now I have gotten 5 victories. Part of the problem there is that they don't just automatically start after each one, so you have to start each attempt manually. Got just what looks like a basic solitaire game, which we've seen less of those lately too. I've also seen less survival games. I'm gonna give this a chance. Maybe we've seen a slight reduction in visual novel games. Overall, I still think we probably have more games, but I think maybe the spread and the variety is becoming a little bit wider. So that almost certainly is a good thing. I guess the other thing here I've started doing more is during these streams I'll do like I am now, which is move my chair so that I'm leaning forward instead of leaning back. Which requires me to spin the microphone. But yeah, that probably would help more. It is kind of crazy how humans have this recliner desire to lean back, and yet the feet on the floor, maybe sitting straight up or maybe leaning a little bit forward, even hunched over, sometimes might be better, although forward hunched over also isn't always guaranteed to be better. Let's do a little bit of follow-less cleanup. Yeah, if I don't go to sleep immediately here, I could see myself also wanting to jump into more programming, trying to get everything working. It is kind of sad that the video Violent Monkey scripts I'm making are not going to be easily programmable so that all the code would be in one place. But that's probably for the better too, because the toggle switch to turn on the code, if it is unique to different domains where the code is similar but slightly custom, it will help toggle off things if it's not working or if it needs to be changed, which it needing to be changed happens fairly often. Alright, let's check out these games. Redacted the safe house, 68 user reviews. Is this really a game I'd want to play? It was rated very positively, but no, I don't think it actually is a game that deserves to be on the wish list. Increasingly, I'm going to need to do wish list cleanup and remove things. This one is not out yet. Is it in some kind of early access? No. Maybe there's a problem there with having things on the follow list when it just says coming soon. 0 Parades for Dead Spies is not out yet either, which then means we are just done with this stream. I guess there has been some level of consistency also in these streams lately, and I guess I appreciate that too. But it still would be nice if these streams were like 2 hours long. Also, these streams are not getting any views at all lately either, which probably means they're at the wrong time. I should really sit down and give some deeper thought to streaming at like 5 or 6 in the evening instead, a couple hours later. Yeah, because this time slot is not really working. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching.